All-Star Weekend is over. The last quarter of the season is here. Russell Westbrook's a Clipper. That's new. Plus, one big takeaway for the Eastern Conference and Western Conference as the playoff race starts to take shape. This is Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA, your daily source for all things NBA from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us part of your week and making us your first listen. We appreciate you guys joining us on whatever platform that you're joining us. You can check out a YouTube version of the show over at youtube.com/LockedOnNBA, as well as Game to Game. You can check out this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any Apple or any podcast app that you have where you can find this show. We appreciate you guys joining us. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network and co-host of Locked On Nuggets. We got back in from beautiful Salt Lake City, and I mean that genuinely, beautiful city. I actually had a really good time in Salt Lake. One of the few people, I think, from All-Star Weekend that had a really great time. Joining me is David Ramil. He's co-host of Locked On Heat. David, how was your All-Star Weekend?
Quiet, not at Salt Lake City, quieter than even being there at Salt Lake City, and with very little basketball involved. So good to kind of disconnect for a little bit and still be kind of in the periphery, watching everything that's taking place and getting all the feedback from you and others that have been in there and saw all the action up close. So I'm curious to see what your takeaways from Salt Lake City were.
Yeah, we'll get to that in the second segment. It was a very sleepy. That was the word that multiple people use. A sleepy All-Star Weekend. I don't know if that's what the league wants, but that's the takeaway. We'll talk about that in the last segment. We're going to get to our stretch run predictions. The last quarter of the season starts on Thursday. We'll give you a big takeaway for the Eastern Conference and Western Conference. But we're going to start with the news of the day, which is that the Los Angeles Clippers, after the Utah Jazz, reached an agreement on a buyout with Russell Westbrook following his trade from the Los Angeles Lakers before the deadline. Russell Westbrook is now set to become a Los Angeles Clipper. Adrian Wojnarowski with the news this morning that he will sign with the Clippers. David, this is a fascinating turn of events, even if you're just like, does Russ really matter? What was most interesting to me was this was clearly a case where right after the trade deadline, Clippers started talking about it openly with media. Paul George, Marcus Morris, all these guys talk about Russ. Paul George is asked at All-Star Weekend, who would you most want to win a championship besides yourself? And he says, probably Westbrook. Like all of this pressure, they're posting, they're tagging him on Instagram. They're making this big push. And you can tell that the front office is kind of like, oh, are you sure, guys? There are other guys. I don't know that's. And so now Russ joins the Clippers. I assume he'll start at point guard.
Oh,
David, I don't know what your let me put it this way. I don't know what your reaction is going to be, but I'm betting it's not going to be positive that the Clippers got Russ.
No, I'm excited for it because it's not in Miami. I'll tell you that much.
Sure.
Listen, I think it's interesting. There's a lot of different narratives and possibilities. There's a lot of drama involved with the decision. The fact that he's going across the hallway to join the Clips and having left the Lakers, I think it's a much better fit for him than the Lakers ever were because, we're talking about the 6th or 7th ranked team in terms of three-point shooting percentage. They've got the requisite shooters to surround Russ with, veterans that have played with him, guys that want him there. I think it's a locker room that's much more open and amenable to accepting what Westbrook can bring to the table at this point in his career, which is not something that's possible in Los Angeles with LeBron James running that team. It's like when you have a team with LeBron, you fit into his universe and you have to accept that role. And Westbrook just can't be that guy. He's still trying to do what he was doing 10 years ago or when he was winning the MVP. And he's no longer that player because he can't balance his career-long inefficiency with his otherworldly athleticism, which allowed him to become the MVP and to rack up those ungodly historic numbers and things of that sort. So we've talked about Westbrook a number of times and how the decline has been particularly egregious because of this. And so now all of a sudden we have him in Los Angeles with a veteran team. And again, players that have played with him before, that know what he brings to the table, that loved him, that talked about him as being a great off-court player, person, great on-court fit, and I could see why it could work. I really do. I want it to work. I really do. I want it to add another level of drama and another dimension to the playoffs that maybe might have been missing had he signed elsewhere. So I think it's going to be interesting. From the on-court perspective, I'm curious that you say that he'll start. I cannot see why, but the fact that it's going to be taking away minutes from Trey Mann, I wonder whether or not he'd be better suited coming off the bench and playing with guys like Batum and others. So, yeah, it's interesting there. What's your takeaway? Why do you think he's a shoe-in to start?
Because Paul George wants him to.
Okay, if that's all that matters, I mean, it could be something as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Terrence Mann's played really well this season. I think I'm very high on Terrence Mann. I honestly think that the Raptors should have done a deal for Fred VanVleet involving Terrence Mann. But I think I personally wonder if Russ goes to Utah. Utah tells him like, "Hey, we'll buy you out. Don't worry about it. You don't need to come into town." And so he gets to kind of take these offers. And reportedly, the Bulls were the other big team. The Heat were on that list. There's some talk about the Wizards.
Yeah.
If you're looking at those teams, outside of Miami, who I think probably still would have started Kyle, I guess.
Yes.
I don't know. Like it's that's how rough it's been for Kyle this season. But Kyle would have started. But like Chicago, he starts. Right. So I kind of wonder if part of his like determining between teams, if part of him was like, hey, I want to know that I'm going to start. Just from, I think there was a level of embarrassment for him coming off the bench. I think there's a level of, now look, like this happens to every player, and he was really good coming off the bench. Like he was the sixth man of the year candidate. The numbers with him actually coming off the bench were pretty good for the Lakers. They were worse when you put him on the floor with the starters. So I think if they decide to bring him off the bench, then, and he's willing to, then that can work. Like, I'm not saying that I know for a fact he's starting. We're too early in that process. Sure. For me, I would assume that given that this is a player-driven move, like this was very clearly the players were recruiting Russell Westbrook, that it makes a lot of sense for him to go ahead and start. Now, I say that from a political standpoint, not from a basketball one. If you're like, does it make sense for Russell Westbrook to start from a basketball? No. It doesn't make sense to sign him. Like, they need a floor general that can play off ball and shoot. That's not Russ, you know? And some people have kind of made the comparison of like, why would you do this if you had John Wall, who was a very similar player? Like, I kind of agree. Like, it's not a noticeable difference here. And a lot of this just comes down. What I also think is interesting is, so Reggie Jackson was a PG guy. He was gone. John Wall, to my understanding, was both a PG and a Kawhi guy, but he was a PG guy, gone. And then they bring in a third one. And Kawhi very clearly wanted a point guard. Like, that's been out there for years that he was wanted a point guard upgrade. And Fred VanVleet, they were in talks with, couldn't get a deal done because Masai wants your firstborn children. And they couldn't get a deal done with Miami because the Heat really just are dead set on getting that 5 seed and going out in the first round. And then, you know, the other option was like Mike Conley, and the Jazz were like, we want draft assets. And the Clippers are like, sorry, OKC owns all ours. So there wasn't really a fit there. I just don't know. Like I said, I just don't know what he does. I don't know where he helps you. I don't know. Cause part of it too, I mean, I'll say this, the idealized version of the Clippers, which we've started to see over the last couple of weeks, features a lot of shooting. It's Batum and Mann and like all of these guys, you know, all these guys that can shoot. Kennard was one of them. He's now with Memphis, but having Russ and shooters, like pick and roll with Russ and Mason Plumlee with 3 shooters, that's a pretty decent, like that will get you through most regular season rotation minutes. He'll eat some regular season minutes. But the problem is just like, he's not going to be a regular season minutes either. Like, they brought him in to be like a guy. The players at least believe that he's like a guy. This is a key piece. It's Russ. And I just don't know that they're aware of how rough it is for him from a finishing perspective at this point in his career.
No, it's all great points. Like, we talked about this in terms of what he would have potentially brought to Miami. And it's like the unwanted, and it's not like he's asked for it, but the fact that he is this incredible, just attention-seeking name, right? Because
Yeah.
he is a Hall of Famer, because he is one of the greatest players in NBA history, etc. Like, there is a lot that his signing comes with, and to your point, they were playing so well lately, and now you completely muck up that process. And it's not Russ's fault. It's not the team's fault. It's not anybody else. Well, it's the front office fault. I guess you could make that argument. But at the same time, like, he's just a huge distraction on a team that really doesn't need any and had been clicking and playing well of late. So it's kind of, yeah, I mean, to your point, this is like the dangerous side of, player empowerment, et cetera, that they could have this kind of a loud voice of like, yeah, bring Russ. He's Russ, he's an MVP, et cetera, when he's clearly not. You need to be a little bit further removed from the kind of friendships and bond of the brotherhood of the NBA and the players and everything else. Like, I mean, I'm surprised they didn't find a way to sign Carmelo Anthony, right? Like, let's bring the gang back from OKC together. Let's see if we can, make one more push. I mean, hey, it might not be late. Do the Clippers have an open roster spot where they can add Carmelo at this point?
Wow, we're just like loading up on all the names. Man, I haven't thought about Melo in a minute, so I don't think they have a roster spot though, given all the guys they've got, like Coffee.
Maybe they could cut Terrence Mann and maybe bring in Carmelo.
Not gonna do that. That's too far. I will note that Law Murray over The Athletic, who covers the Clippers, says, "quote The expectation is that Russell Westbrook will start for the Clippers at some point."
There you go.
So, he'll start with the Clippers, but may not be right away. Official signing won't happen until 48 hours after the Jazz waive Westbrook, which was today. So we'll see how it goes with LA, the other LA team. I will say what I really want now. I'm really rooting now for the Mavericks and the Timberwolves. And you ask why? And it's because there is a chance that we could get a play-in game between the Lakers and the Clippers with Russ versus the Lakers. And that would be great drama. That would be excellent drama. Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about All-Star Weekend, some of our takeaways, following up on Jackson's conversation yesterday with John Corrales, as well as we'll get to some comments from Adam Silver over the weekend and why, spoiler alert, I don't think the league really knows what to do about load management. We'll do that when we come back on Locked On NBA. But first, I need to tell you about FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of Locked On. The midway point of the NBA season is here and now, and it's a perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. You can get in on the Clippers. If you're buying in on Russ, you can actually get over 45.5 wins right now at FanDuel Sportsbook at +100. So it's juice a little bit to the under. If you believe that the Clippers are going to make a run, now's a good time to get in on them. FanDuel will even let you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We'll be right back on Locked On NBA. Back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us, making this party today. Appreciate you guys being with us on a Tuesday. Matt Moore and David Ramil. So All-Star Weekend wrapped up on Sunday night, and there was all sorts of commentary on it. If you want to hear Jackson and John talking about how accepting All-Star for what it is, you can do that. A lot of commentary today about how bad the game was from the players themselves. Michael Malone says, I don't know what that was, but it wasn't a basketball game. A lot of the players, like Jaylen Brown, was critical of the effort level that was given. My take on it, David, as we'll kind of breeze through some all-star subjects, my take on it is, look, we have a competitiveness problem in the regular season. How can we expect the all-star game to be competitive? Like, we have enough of a problem generating games where all players are healthy, available, and in a good rest spot to give high-level effort in the regular season. Like, the number of great regular season games we get between all-star caliber teams, you might get like a random game that's like, oh, this is a really good game, but it's more about like who is available and it just kind of happened into it. I don't know that we can expect more. I've never been a big guy on the all-star game, and that's okay. Like, I'm not going to sit here and trash it. It's okay if you enjoyed it. That's my thing. If you enjoyed it, that's great. don't be surprised when people don't like exhibition games where no one tries. Like, don't be like, you guys should just like it. People like it. They don't like it. It's fine. We can all have like and dislike different things, and we're not going to have to talk about it again for another year. For me, I have more important things to talk about, like the playoff picture. But I don't have a lot of interest or honestly respect for the All-Star game. It's fine. The players have a good time being there. You see exactly what that weekend is about. And it's not about celebrating the game or competition. It's about money and parties. And that's fine. I don't have any problem with that, but no. I'm not going to pretend it's something different than it is either.
Yes. And I totally get your perspective, because I find that way myself often, even with the regular season. Like I know that, a lot of these games don't matter, and I've got to try to watch a lot more basketball than most people. And it's still kind of hard at times to get myself psyched up, because there are, between the free throw shooting and the commercial breaks, and just the fact that I don't have as much time as I'd like to, I don't find myself as geared up for these kind of particular games. A February game between two bottom feeding teams isn't, as interesting as you might think it is. And so with the All-Star game, I can see the rationale that it's not a great event, but the fans don't see it that way. And that's where I kind of draw this line here, is that we have so many of us on the media side of things talking about how the game it's so boring, it's not, the Elam ending didn't fix anything, it's these weird events, it's just a show, it's just all about business and money and parties. And it's like, what, there are fans, the same argument that players or other media people want to use about why, if LeBron sits out a game when he goes to Oklahoma City, why that's a problem, because some 7-year-old and his parents may have saved up just enough money to watch this one game. Well, that kind of extends to the All-Star weekend as well. And I was just talking about this on Lockdown Heat. I don't think that the event recognizes the importance of the fans and their appreciation of seeing these greats, historic players, all in one place playing together, and they don't do enough to make it fan accessible. It's about media access, it's about the parties, it's about the show, it's about everything else, but it's not about the fans getting the opportunity to just meet these players and see them up close, because that's really where it is. Because I even from my own fandom of basketball, the idea was, I was late to the NBA. I did not care for the league growing up, and not until I was older, and then I saw all these great players in one particular gathering, whether it was the All-Star or 1992 in Barcelona, and seeing like names I'd heard in the background, the periphery, and being like, wow, all these greats are together in one place. That means something to fans. It's like, wow, I can see this guy Nikola Jovic that I might not know too much about and why he's so good, and LeBron James, who I know just passed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And that's how the history of the game gets built on. That's how the game grows domestically, internationally, seeing all these players there. And so I think we have to do more as a collective. And, it's not knocking you, of course, but it's just we do such a good job of trashing the game because we don't find it interesting, that we forget that it is interesting for some people. And we should do more, if not to highlight that interest, to not knock it as much.
I think that's funny that you say that, because I get more pushback from fans. That's interesting that you say that, because I get a lot more pushback from fans about the All-Star game than I do from media, because media generally tends to buy into the idea of like, this is a legacy event. This event matters because it's about recognizing these players and like the history of the All-Star game.
Sure.
And I think that some of the pushback that occurs in the media is because they see the deterioration of the effort level year over year, decade over decade, compared to what the legacy of that game. It's like, because the weekend should be a celebration of basketball. You mentioned the fans. I'm not even kidding. My favorite thing to go to in Chicago, it was crossover. And it was the same thing here. It's basically NBA Jam session. Yeah. They let the kids in. The kids are all shooting on baskets and going through drills. They have the players cycle through and they'll do autographs. Lauri Markkanen was there, and there was a line all the way through the convention center waiting for him. And that was really cool to see this guy that only showed up this year is this All-Star and had a huge line out for him. There's all sorts of artists, and like there's a bunch of like fashion designers. I shared some like these really wicked jackets on Twitter that they had, like some shops are in there as well. Chicago did really well with just art exhibits, like a bunch of art of artists, local artists in Chicago had these exhibit booths in the event center that they held crossover in, just about basketball. And some of them were like selling art, and some of them were just showing it. And it was like a really cool celebration of basketball. The weekend is also, like, I want to be very clear on this. Like, the weekend's a celebration of Black culture. Like, everything around the game is very much a celebration of Black culture. And like, I think it's awesome that there's a weekend where that is given the space to do so. Right. And it's pretty remarkable and pretty incredible to see. I think that those things are really important. Like, I think All-Star Weekend matters. And I don't even necessarily care that the players don't try, because it's like, would you rather them try and risk injury? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I at this point, I'm kind of like, they get injured anyway. I feel like we're doing a lot to try and prevent something that's going to happen anyway, which is that players are going to get hurt. I do agree with the biggest thing you said there that I agree with you is the fan accessibility. You would not believe going to these events and seeing how much of it's just corporate sponsor. They're empty. Like, there were tweets about how empty the arena was on Saturday night. Do you know why? Because all those seats are given to corporate sponsors, and the people that were given those tickets to have other parties to go to. And it's just like, the fans would love to get in and watch the dunk contest. Like, that would be amazing. But the ones that do go on sale, they're priced out. You know, and like, these are the things is like, if we're going to I agree with you. If it's a weekend about the fans, let's make it for the fans. And the problem with that is, I don't know if you know this, David, but the NBA likes money.
They do. Really, I've seen it. I've seen it up close. Yeah.
Really like money. Before we end the segment, I want to talk to you a little bit about David Stern. Adam Silver's press conference.
We could talk about David Stern.
Yeah, I talk about David Stern. Back at the good old days.
Sorry.
Draconian efforts from the commissioner's office. So Adam Silver spoke with the media, and it was really interesting because there was a lot of talking out of both sides of the mouth this weekend, and there's a lot of interesting dynamics between the players union and their comments, and some of the stuff out of the owners that you heard kind of bubbling around, as well as Silver statements. So like, Silver does an interview with Sage Steele, and he talks about a conversation about, hey, we may start putting game requirements on All-Star awards or on awards. Like, that might be a part of the conversation. And then he's in a press conference with the media, and there were several questions fielded at him about rest management. And he had some interesting things to say in there. Among them was, he mentioned that, look, he pushed back on the idea of reducing games. Not surprising. He's going to have to do that, right, because nobody wants to lose the money. But one of the things that he mentioned was, he was like, look, we had a test case 2 years ago with the 72 game season after the bubble during the COVID impacted year. Yep. And it didn't reduce injuries. It didn't change anything. We still had the same number of missed games. You're looking at me, and then we all felt the same way sitting there. We're like, yeah, because there was no off season, and it was truncated into the same number of days. Like, this is not apples to apples. The other thing I thought that was interesting is he did mention that some of the data has brought up that injuries don't occur later in the season than they do earlier. So the number of games is not correlated with a higher injury occurrence. It's that injuries occur early in the season, injuries occur late in the season. Now, a lot of this is like, obviously the density of those games is what matters. So he did say the league was open to the idea of elongating the window. So basically it would be starting earlier, maybe starting last week of September or something, and then going into maybe later, stretching it into July. You know, if that's my hypothetical, that wasn't mentioned by Silver. If you stretch it out longer, you eliminate the back-to-backs, there's more time for rest, there's more time for practice. And that was kind of like the conversation. If we accept that we're not going to get fewer games because money, then is elongating the season, do you think, a reasonable alternative to try and improve player availability throughout the season?
No, because there's always the argument that it conflicts with other sports, namely football, reduced viewership, lack of interest, and things of that sort. And for a lot of peripheral fans, even for me, as I mentioned before, like the season feels so long that it's hard to generate the same level of interest. And so stretching out the season probably feels like it would hinder that even more. And I wonder how much of that, the data that he shared was, there's less injury or equal amounts of injury late in the season. It's like, yeah, maybe it's because they're playing for more in terms of playoff seeding and things of that sort. So maybe those players are fighting through injury. There's this whole other nuanced conversation about when injury takes place and whether or not they can kind of stomach it and just play through it as many fans would want them to. So I think that's something to consider, and that's not something quantifiable in whatever data gathering methods the NBA's front office has put together. But anyway,
I won't say that because I don't know. I'll just say, like, I would imagine they probably have kind of done the research to classify the injuries into various like minor short-term injury versus like long-term suffered season ending, etc., or more than a week injury. The other thing that he kind of talked about, he mentioned expansion, basically said that the owners have said, hey, let's get through the new CBA and the new media deal, and then we can talk about expansion, which that tracks. Cool. Yeah. Give us all the money, and then we'll get to a point where we can get more money from the expansion. So that makes sense. But if you're in Seattle and Vegas, it's probably going to be 2025, 26, probably 2026, 27 before Seattle and Vegas are added, which is the expectation from everybody. It's the worst kept secret in the league is like, it's going to be Seattle and Vegas. And then the only other thing so there's a lot of optimism from everyone I talked to this weekend, as well as in Silver's comments, and the head of the union spoke with Tim Bontemps of ESPN, same thing. A lot of confidence that they'll be able to avoid a lockout. They've extended the deadline again. They're getting closer. They've hammered out, I think, a significant chunk of those. I think there's still some resistance points. It doesn't sound like the money is going to be a large factor in this one in terms of the BRI split. That was the determining factor in the 2011 lockout, which was now 12 years ago. Wow, I'm getting old. But that's the difference here, is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of tension over the BRI split. And as long as that's in place, there will probably be some conversations about trying to limit trade demands. Silver kind of talked around it. So, trade demands are bad. The union agrees that public trade demands are bad. Those weren't done, is what he said, because it's like, yeah, no, he told a reporter, and the reporter said it's the same thing, but they treat that as very different. They still like player movement. Silver talked a lot about how good it is, basically, that the league moved so many players last week. Yeah. So that doesn't seem like there's any sort of change there. The last one I think interesting for you is what he talked about with the RSNs, the regional sports networks. So if you're not up on things, Bally's Sportsnet, that has, I think, like 18 teams, is facing bankruptcy. And there's a real concern about those networks just going under and all these teams having no TV partner. Silver said that he had spoken with Diamond, that owns Bally's, about a short-term solution to make sure that there's coverage. But the long-term answer is going to be really interesting on this, because from what I heard this weekend, there's not a silver bullet. I had entered the weekend kind of assuming that the league was just going to wind up selling League Pass to an entity like Apple or Amazon, and basically doing it like Sunday Ticket, being like, no more blackouts. You want to follow your team, you buy the team pass through Apple, or you buy the league pass through Apple, and all the games are on there. And it sounds like there's still a lot of conversation about segmenting proliferation of the IP, which is the games, like segmenting out the distribution of the games across multiple networks. So I think in the short term, this is going to be a little bit messy, but it does sound like the league is not in a urgent panic mode about people not being able to watch their teams over the last month of the season.
They'll figure it out. There's too much money involved, as you said. If there's one thing the league likes, and so when it comes to this, the other things that we discussed and that he discussed during the weekend were probably a lot more murky, a lot more nuanced, and a lot more difficult to hammer out. But when it comes to figuring out how to get a deal done so that you can line those coppers, yeah, absolutely, they'll figure it out. I'm not too worried about it.
Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about what our stretch run predictions are for the Eastern and Western Conference. We'll do that when we return on Locked On NBA. Final segment here on Locked On NBA. David Ramil, joining me, Matt Moore. Glad you guys are with us. Hope you guys had a great All-Star weekend. Hope you're enjoying a few days off from the basketball. I'd be all right with a game tonight. I'd be okay with a nice, Bucks Clippers tilt or something. It's funny you mentioned when we were in that first segment, when we were in the beginning of the second segment, rather, when we were talking about All-Star Weekend. You're like, yeah, it's kind of hard to get up for some of these games between these teams that are out of it. And I was like, I have an easier time getting up for like Pacers Jazz than I do for Celtics Bucks when the Celtics are sitting 8 guys. That to me is harder than the other.
That is a possibility. Yeah, I can see that.
But let's get to some stretch run predictions. So there's about 23 games left in the NBA season. There's about a quarter of the season left. This often catches people by surprise. They kind of think that All-Star is the halfway mark. No. Season's mostly over, folks. We're 2/3 of the way done here. So look, the standings are interesting. A lot of conversation with folks this weekend about parity and is it good? But the reality is that things are very tight in both conferences as it pertains to the standings. Eastern Conference has some powerhouses. Not a lot of dark horse candidates versus the Western Conference, which I think you can really, if you picked a team in the top 9 to come out of it, I wouldn't be shocked. So I'll let you go first. You're the Eastern Conference representative here on Locked On NBA. What's your big picture prediction for the Eastern Conference?
It's a tough one, kind of a spinoff of what you and I were talking about beforehand. But I actually think the Eastern Conference is down to a two-team race, and all these other pretenders to the throne, Cleveland, Philadelphia, even to some degree New York, Miami, whatever that kind of conglomeration at the bottom is, they're all vying for last place basically at this point. I don't think Cleveland, for as much as they have improved this season and have a pretty good squad, have made changes at the trade deadline, etc. Philadelphia, for all their star talk, I just don't see either of them as being realistic Eastern Conference champions. I think it comes down to Bucks Celtics, and even from that, I know you talked about this earlier before we started recording, that you see the Celtics as being unbeatable. You're right. They do look like a very tough contender. I still like the Bucks' chances, and I'm not sure why exactly. I don't know if they've just got the experience factor. They've got Giannis. That's certainly good enough. You've got a pretty good surrounding cast of characters there. Drew Holiday's a fantastic player. Middleton's health still a question. I still like their chances. I don't know why. I know there's an argument to be made for both teams. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, is that it's basically Bucks versus Celtics in the Eastern Conference, and either one of those teams could advance, but everybody else is just looking at last place.
Yeah, I should have clarified. I wouldn't describe the Celtics as unbeatable. I think you're right to frame it as a 2-team race. I think that the starting question that you should ask yourself is, if you're gonna be like, I think this team can win the East, the first question you have to ask is, can they beat the Celtics? Mm-hmm. And you say like, well, yeah, Matt, they're the number 1 team in the conference. I don't think the same thing about the West. Now, I think the Nuggets are the best team in the Western Conference, but the gap is a lot more narrow.
Let's say last year, Miami, number 1 team in the Eastern Conference. Did anybody view them as being unbeatable, right? Or the obstacle to the Eastern Conference final?
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, nobody was like, can they beat Miami though? Everyone's like, oh yeah, it'll be tough, but they can probably beat Miami. The reason, I think you got good reason to back the Bucks. The Bucks have been absolutely dynamite over the last month of the season. The offense has really picked up. Chris Middleton's given them a huge boost. Their numbers with the big 4 healthy are ridiculous. Giannis is obviously a truck. We'll see with this wrist injury, which he's having more testing done today. No word as we're recording this late.
Are you concerned about that?
A little bit. Look, just if it's not from a season-ending standpoint, it doesn't seem that bad, right? But just from if they do the imaging on it and they're like, yeah, he sprained something, which is essentially a minor tear, or he tore something in the wrist, and it's going to be 3 weeks. The Bucks are still going to make the playoffs. The Bucks are probably still going to be a top 4 seed. They're good enough to manage the schedule to get through, but like, it dings your home court things. If it comes down to, you're going to have to go into Philly for a game 7. If nothing else, even if you're like, well, they'll beat Philly, even if it takes 7 games. Okay. But that means that you went 7 games. Well, the Celtics might've rested. What's interesting is I do kind of, the only team in the East I think could cause some ruckus is the Cavs. Oh. I really like the way that they match up with Boston. Like, I really like that matchup. They beat them twice early in the season, and it was early in the season. I don't really care about beating them. I just care about the fact that they take what the Celtics want to do and they kind of invert it, because the Celtics want to switch everything, which leaves the back line open. And they've got Mobley and Allen in there to absolutely hammer you on the offensive glass. The Celtics are like, we've got Al Horford and Robert Williams, so we can play with both or just one on the floor. And the Cavs are like, we have Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, and we can play with just one on the floor. The Celtics are like, we have all these 3-point bombers, and the Cavs, that's where they start to fall apart. But the Cavs have Donovan Mitchell, who's a better, I don't know, I would still classify like Tatum and Brown as both wings. So Donovan Mitchell is the best guard in that matchup, right? And Darius Garland's a really good one. So I like that matchup, but it is kind of interesting to kind of look at everyone else. Like, I don't think the Sixers can beat the Celtics. I don't think the Heat can beat the Celtics. And with the Bucks, I've seen them clank so many open jumpers through the years that I'm just kind of like, man, they got everything to go their way in 2021 and came away with an incredible NBA title, but I don't know if they got enough to do it again. In the West, lot more. I think the field is more open. I will say that I don't like the conversation about the West is wide open. Okay, the Nuggets have the best record in the league. They're going to have the number 1 seed in the playoffs, which means they're going to have home court, and they're damn near unbeatable at home. Like, they've just been almost unbeatable at Mile High. So if you got to go in there, it's going to be really tough for you. I've watched how they play in that building enough. I don't have a solve for them. That's one of the things, is I don't know how you solve them offensively. And the answer is going to be you're going to have to outscore them. But even then, that gets tough. They've moved into the top 15 in defense. That's not my big takeaway, though. My big takeaway, my prediction, is going to be about the Pacific Division. Okay? You realize we have 5 teams within range of the playoffs in that division now, with the Lakers kind of like scrapping to get into the play-in. Like, if the Lakers made the 8th seed, you wouldn't be shocked. You wouldn't be like, oh my gosh. And so you've got Kings, who lead the division, the Suns, who are right behind them, the Clippers, the Warriors, and the Lakers. I will go ahead and predict that 4 of the 5 make the playoffs, which is an interesting one, because you just go, oh, the Lakers probably don't. It could be the Warriors. No update on Steph. Don't know where he's going to be. If they wind up in the play-in, those 1-game play-ins can be a real tricky thing. And we saw that 3 years ago when it was the Warriors in the bubble versus the Lakers. And then the next night versus the Grizzlies. So I kind of still think that they're still going to have these representatives. I went back and forth on 4 or 3. Part of me kind of wonders if it's just going to be 3. The Timberwolves are tough, and the Thunder are tough. Thunder are playing really good basketball. This next month of games is going to be fascinating to watch, particularly in the Eastern Conference or in the Western Conference. The East is a little bit more like, oh, Wizards, Bulls. Good job, guys. But in the West, it's like all of these games are going to matter. Like, every night in the Western Conference between 2 teams, all of those games are going to matter. But I do think that we're going to see the Kings in, the Clippers in, the Suns in, and then one of the Warriors and the Lakers. And it'll be interesting to see which of those. But if you told me, by the way, that the Clippers were to slip, the Warriors grabbed the 6, the Clippers fell, and they got knocked out, wouldn't be shocked there either, despite how well they played recently. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think, in this last 25 games of the season in the Western Conference.
So, despite this, you don't think that it's wide open in the West, right? Or is it because it's just the Nuggets are such a clear favorite over everybody else? Is that basically your rationale?
I think if we were to do this in terms of tiers, right? If we put these teams in tiers, I think the top tier of the league is the Celtics, the Bucks, the Nuggets, and the Suns, because they got Kevin Durant.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, like, in a way, I don't buy this idea of just the Warriors. If you're like, the Warriors are the Warriors, I absolutely agree. I tweeted about this weekend. The starters still have the best net rating of any team that's played 100 minutes together. That matters. Every time that they finish a series fully healthy, if they play the entire series with Steph, Clay, and Dre in all games, right? They've won the title every time. They didn't win in 2016 when Draymond got suspended, and they didn't win in 2019 when Clay got hurt. When their guys play, they've won the title. Going up against that is NBA history, which says that if you're not a top 3 seed, you don't make the finals. It's ridiculous how often top 3 seeds in the last 20 years, there's only one team that's won the NBA title as lower than a 3 seed. It's ridiculous. So unless the Warriors are able to put together a masterful run, history says that it's not going to be them. And I think that's really interesting. The Nuggets have done what everybody's asked of them. And it's tough for me to talk about the Nuggets because, like, I'm in Denver. I cover them locally. I do Locked On Nuggets. So there's always going to be an implication of bias. But I've been covering the league long enough. I know fraudulent.
I'm a believer too.
Yeah, do what?
I'm a believer too. I mean, 100%.
Like,
I saw them last week, and I was like, "Who's going to stop this?" Like, and first of all, my first is that I'm sorry, Freudian slip. Nikola Jokic is the best player in the league by far. He's a 3-time MVP, and he is one of a kind in that sense. Like, he is incredible to watch, and just how, like, again, one of the best defenders in the league. And Bam Adebayo is like a plaything around Jokic. It's just it's very, very unusual to see. And then the fact that they were missing so many key players right before the trade deadline, and it's like they're still a damn good group. I mean, without Aaron Gordon out there in the lineup, without a couple other players who I'm forgetting off the top of my head, like they still beat up on a pretty scrappy team in Miami that had won 8 games in a row at home too. So whatever.
How bad were I want to know how bad your mentions were and your comments were, because I listened to that Locked On Heat episode, and you and Wes were so complimentary of Joker the whole way through, and I was like, God, Heat fans must have hated this after the Markieff Morris incident.
The same European fans that came to tell us that we had no idea what we were talking about Jokic were so complimentary about that episode. So they only tune in. They just find whatever, whether it's a praise or an insult, they'll find you, and they will leave a comment. So beware of those Jokic fans for sure.
Before we get out of here, I got some breaking news. Just so we kind of slide this one in. Patrick Beverley is agreeing on a minimum league deal to finish the season with the Chicago Bulls. So he's found himself a team. That's not a bad fit, right? They needed a point guard. They wanted Russ. Russ chooses the Clippers. They get Patrick Beverley, gives them some defense, gives them like a capable point guard. I actually kind of like that. Kind of like they need some attitude. Bev's an upgrade, I think, on Ayo Dosunmu. I like Ayo, but he just needs some more seasoning. So I actually kind of like Bev and DeRozan, Levine. I don't know what what does this mean for them?
Play-in tournament, baby.
Yeah. You get Patrick Beverley jumping on another table and they win the play-in tournament. I think it's probably
love it. That's exciting.
All right, it's gonna wrap it up for Locked On NBA. Thanks for joining us. Make sure to check out Locked On Heat with David. You can follow me on Twitter at HP Basketball and David on Twitter at DRamil13. Tomorrow, you got John Corrales and Jake Madison. They'll take you through whatever's going on in the NBA tomorrow as we kind of coast through these couple days before games start later in the week. Make sure to hit us with those rate, review, and subscribes. Give us those 5-star reviews. Hit us the like and subscribe on YouTube. We'll see you guys again next time. Thanks for joining us on Locked On NBA.